together and I'll put it in the thing.
All right, so welcome to this special series of Real Estate Fight Club called What Would You Do? And this is where we explore some professional ethics committee violations and standard violations to what? I don't even know what I'm saying. Anyway.
Professional standards violations.
Yes, professional standards
and ethics
violations. So here with me today is Rachael Real from Rachael Real Estate in Chicago. Hey, Rachael.
Hello, Jen.
How we doing?
Good. How about you?
Good. I feel like I'm going to get in trouble today.
Well, it would not surprise me.
It was so we're talking.
You're what we call a frequent flyer.
Yeah, nice, real nice. So we are talking today about should compensation be part of the purchase contract? I mean, obvious. No. Yes. Like, of course it is, Rachael. But tell us what's going on. Like, what is the problem here?
Okay, so the problem that we see is that when you have a contract between a buyer and a seller, the buyer and the seller are the parties to the contract.
Okay, agreed.
Which means so now take a step back to that and then look at the MLS. So the MLS is where you see the property. It's the buyer's agent. Okay. You see the offer of compensation that's being made to you from the seller/listing agent or listing brokerage.
Got it.
That offer of compensation is a contract between the listing brokerage and the seller. Yes, so you have that contract over here.
Okay.
And you have the contract for the sale of the property that's between the seller and the buyer.
Okay. But
if you're going to change a term of this contract, it doesn't belong over here.
Yeah, but the thing is the offer, the purchase contract or the sales contract is about all of the terms associated with that offer.
It is, but that contract that dictates that amount of money is between the seller and the listing brokerage.
Okay,
so if you're going to change a term of that, you have to do that separately.
Okay, it's so annoying. I don't think we need all this damn paperwork when it could just be on one form. All right, let me ask you this specific question. Okay, so I'm the buyer's agent, which, doesn't happen often. But let's say the offer for compensation in the MLS is, let's call it 2%. And the contract that I have with the buyer is that it's 3%, let's say, for example. Let's go with really unusual. Let's say the offer for compensation is 7% and my agreement is 10. Okay.
Right. Let's say that there's a
gap.
A differential between what the seller is going to pay in the MLS, that offer of compensation in the MLS, and what your buyer
is lower
covers.
Than what my buyer agreement says.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So then I'll go to the buyer, and I've done this before, and I go to the buyer and say, hey, look, the offer is lower than what you and I agreed upon.
Right.
So what do you want to do?
How would you like to proceed?
This?
Right. And because hopefully at that point you've already had this conversation during your buyer consultation.
Right.
That this is how buyer compensation is handled. This is how the offer of compensation is made to me.
Yes.
And in our listing agreements, we'll also say, here's the amount that I'm working for. If it's anything less than that, then here's how we handle it.
Yes.
So
exactly.
It's very transparent.
And we've done that, right?
Right.
And so what's happened before is that they say, well, I would like to make this offer on the house, but then I would like that they cover that gap.
Okay.
That the sellers cover the gap. And so we make it part of the contract.
So, and that's totally cool. You can totally do that.
Well, what's wrong then?
Right. So, well, there's depends on how you do this. So if you're in that situation, if you're the buyer's agent and say that differential is $1,500, just to make it a simple number. If that buyer wants to write into his contract, here's my offer, and I'm asking for a $1,500 closing cost credit, no problem. You're not changing the offer of compensation. You're just asking the seller to provide a closing cost credit.
Okay.
But that would be the appropriate way to do it if you're going to do it through the contract, because really that buyer's closing costs, you're not changing the compensation in the MLS. You're still agreeing that they're paying you X.
So then what happens? So if the seller agrees,
say your buyer owes you $1,500.
Okay.
They're asking for a closing cost credit, and at the closing, that buyer's expenses, which he's paying you $1,500, are coming out of the proceeds, coming out of that sale. So that's completely fine, because you're not taking that offer and saying, we're only going to offer you this if you pay me this. So the way to do that appropriately would be using it as a closing cost credit. How did you do it when you did yours? Because you said yours was a little different.
Well, I mean, I don't want to bring this up in court now.
You don't want to fully admit that you did something wrong.
Right. Well, I mean, I did do it. So, I mean, if it's
Right.
wrong, it already went through. But
Just think you've learned something today.
right. So I think,
You look thrilled.
Yeah, I'm excited. So this came up because we saw an article in Inman. Who wrote that?
Right.
Andrea
Brambilla.
And it'll
I'm sure I'm
be
butchering that too.
in the vault. So jennifermertland.com/vault. It's a great article about the 22 common ways agents violate the Realtor Code of Ethics. And then give us what she said. Do you have it in front of you?
I do. Let me see here. So the making your so it's one of the common violations on cooperation. It says making your compensation part of the purchase contract. It says if you're going to alter your compensation, you need to do it in another form that is probably dictated by your state. You cannot use your purchase agreements. It just doesn't make
sense to me, because if you it could potentially change the terms of the other contract.
No, it won't if you do it the correct way. So there's a couple different ways you can do it. One of which is asking for a closing cost credit for that buyer to be able to fulfill their contract to you.
Okay.
So it says you cannot use your purchase agreements to change your compensation or change another realtor's compensation. It cannot be part of our contracts. Followed by sending a counteroffer out to a buyer's agent and saying you can have it at this price if you reduce your commission would be a violation. So you're looking, there's a couple different ways around it, but you cannot make an offer or a counteroffer and make that contingent upon a flat out negotiation of compensation.
Well, here's what we need people to do. Go to the Facebook page, and when I'm czar and Rachel's on the cabinet, when I'm czar of real estate, do you want this to be this rule to be banished from the kingdom?
Well, and like I said, there's different ways to do it. And as long as you're not changing using one contract with these two parties to change the terms of a contract that you're not a party to.
I mean,
that's ultimately what comes
that makes sense, right?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So because they are two separate contracts, and
they're two separate things, right?
They are easily confused and easily brought together.
Right.
I don't know.
People have a hard time discerning what that really means. So for example,
except that it does affect the same parties, right? So if I have the contract with buyer that says, hey, this is my fee for helping you, and buyer and me agree to that, and then I say, normally how it works is that the listing agent and the seller agree, and typically it's the same. But sometimes it's not. And when it's not, you're on the hook.
Right, exactly. And I always tell people, I'll tell my buyers that if there's ever an opportunity that you're going to be on the hook for something, I'm going to let you know before we even walk into the house.
Correct.
So, and I said, I'm never going to stand in the way of you looking at a house because that compensation doesn't jive between the MLS and what our agreement is. I said, there will be a way to work it out. And I'm not worried about that. I said, the chances of this happening are also maybe 5%. It's very slim.
Well, for now, right? But
right.
Like we talked in the Better Call Saul episodes about, what if
all kinds
change?
Of blank could hit the fan pretty soon. Right.
Right. Especially with, the DOJ and the NAR drama and all this. But let's take
this will also become a big thing too and I'm assuming this is going to happen where you are, but they're talking about our client copies of MLS listing sheets now including what that co-op compensation is. Because right now, if you look at a client copy where we are, that compensation is not on there. It's only on the broker version.
Yeah, and we've thought about that before.
Yes. The reason I like that is because I think it's going to force buyers agents to have that conversation when a lot of them are not having it currently. So it's going to increase transparency. Right. And it's going to increase the transparency between the buyers agents and the buyers.
Yeah, well, I feel like we could go down a rabbit hole, which we're not.
You want to go down that rabbit hole?
No.
Well, we've got a good case on this one, so we'll talk about that on the other side.
Perfect. Well, let me tell you about a couple of our sponsors, and then when I'm done, I want to hear some best practices. If there is a gap, what are the ways to They're
Absolutely.
best practices to like mitigate that gap.
You got
So I want to tell you about Vulcan 7, which I use to dial expires for sale by owner, circle prospecting. They are a great partner of ours. And if you go to vulcan7.com/Jennifer Mertland, you'll get 2 weeks of 2 weeks for $49, which you'll get tons of numbers. It's fun. Try cold calling, Rachel. It's so fun.
Is it though?
It is. I love it. It's how you make friends. Look, if you're not doing the number of deals that you want to be doing, you got to go make new friends. Why not just call them?
Okay,
you
well, if
know?
you put that spin on it, I'm okay with that.
Okay, good. But if you, and also too, coupled with that, check out Ghost Poster, which is Monica's company. So go to mycoachmonica.com and enter in Fight Club, and you will get a discount on $50 discount on Ghost Poster, which provides Facebook postings every day. And all you do is post them. It's great. And you get business. Boom, boom.
That's fantastic.
I know, it's a good one. But Rachel, okay, so what are some best practices when there's a gap in the compensation from what we agreed to what they're offering? What do we do?
Well, so again, there's a couple ways you can deal with it. You can, again, on the buyer side, you're not changing the terms of anything between the seller and the listing brokerage.
Mhm.
On the buy side, you can ask for a closing cost credit in the amount that the amount of that
The
difference,
gap. Mhm.
and that to cover that gap. So that's one very simple way of doing it. We do have a case if you want to talk about that a little bit.
All right, what is it?
Thoughts are okay. So to recap, Article 3, and this kind of straddles between Article 3 and Article 16, depending on if you are the list side or the buy side.
Okay.
So Article 3 says realtors shall cooperate with other brokers except when cooperation is not in the client's best interest. The obligation to cooperate does not include the obligation to share commissions, fees, or to otherwise compensate another broker.
Okay.
So standard of practice 3-2 says any change in compensation offered for cooperative services must be communicated to the other realtor prior to the time that realtor submits an offer to purchase/lease the property.
That makes sense.
After a realtor has submitted an offer to purchase or lease the property, the listing broker may not attempt to unilaterally modify the offered compensation with respect to that cooperative transaction. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. You can't, yeah, you can't change it after you've already seen it and
Once the
received an
ship has left the
offer.
dock, you can't like jack with that. You
Right.
just can't mess with it.
Right.
So Article 16 says realtors shall not engage in any practice or take any action inconsistent with exclusive representation or exclusive brokerage relationship agreements that other realtors have with clients. So standard of practice 16-16 says realtors acting as subagents or buyer/tenant representatives or brokers shall not use the terms of an offer to purchase to attempt to modify the listing broker's offer of compensation to subagents or buyer-tenant reps or brokers, nor make the submission of an executed offer to purchase contingent on the listing broker's agreement to modify the offer of compensation. It's a mouthful. Same thing on both sides, really. You
I mean,
cannot.
even though the thing is though, is like, I think the suggestion of like, let's say the gap is the 1,500, like we've been talking about,
Right.
and the buyer asked for the credit. I mean, they're using the credit for the
Right.
compensation difference. And I know they don't have to say that that's what they're doing, but that
Right.
is
No,
what
not
they're
at all.
doing. So it's
Right.
like,
And that's okay because that's a buyer's closing cost expense. So if the buyer lists out all of their closing costs, one of their
Mhm.
closing cost expenses is going to be paying their broker,
right.
and that's totally fine.
Okay.
So it's when you say, hey,
It
I'm
just
going to
seems
make
like
this
semantics.
it is
It's
a
like,
little
don't
bit.
tell me, but I know what it is. But
Right.
let's not talk about it.
All right, so let's talk about the case that we've got here, and you can tell me what you think about this.
Okay.
Okay, so this is a buyer's agent's demand that listing agent reduce compensation. So Realtor B contacted Realtor A. So Realtor A is the listing broker and B is the buyer broker,
Okay.
and notified her that he was a buyer's agent and was interested in showing one of her listings to his client, a prospective purchaser.
Okay.
Realtor A made an appointment for Realtor B and his client to view the property. Shortly thereafter, Realtor B presented Realtor A with a signed offer to purchase from his client, which was contingent on Realtor A's willingness to reduce her commission by the amount she had offered through the MLS to subagents, and on the seller's willingness to compensate the buyer for the commission the buyer owed to Realtor B, his agent.
Okay.
You follow? Here, let me read that again. So the offer was, The offer, was contingent on Realtor A's willingness to reduce her commission by the amount she had offered through the MLS to subagents, and on the
So
seller's
she,
willingness to compensate the buyer for the commission the buyer owed to Realtor B, his agent.
well, and the buyer had no idea what the agreement was between the,
Amen. That's exactly why you
so
can't do
why
that,
would he
because you don't
say
know what that is.
reduce? It could be higher.
Could be anything.
So
You have no
change
idea. You're
it.
trying to change something you don't even know what it is.
That doesn't make sense.
Doesn't even belong. That's why it doesn't belong there. Okay. So Realtor A presented the offer to her client, the seller, explaining that she would not agree to reduce the previously agreed commission as
So it
specified in
was
their listing
reduced,
contract.
but it could have been higher.
Well, it could have been. Who knows?
Who knows?
So Realtor
Anyway.
A then filed a complaint with the local board charging Realtor B with violating Article 16 as interpreted by Standard Practice 16-16. In her complaint, Realtor A stated that Realtor B had interfered in her agency relationship with the seller by encouraging the buyer to condition acceptance of his offer on the renegotiation of Realtor A's commission arrangement with her client, the seller.
Yeah, why would it matter?
Well, he could have just used the credit and, a seller credit and accomplished the same thing.
Well,
literally.
Right. Like, yeah, it's kind of like it seems like there's more to the story, right? It seems like somehow the buyer knew the seller situation or something, like somebody knew something, it seemed like.
Maybe.
Or else, like, how else does this make sense? So what happened?
So Realtor B defended his action, arguing that Realtor A's refusal to reduce her commission by an amount equal to what she had offered other brokers for subagency services would have placed the seller in a position of having to pay an excessive amount of commission if he had accepted the offer, agreeing to contribute to the buyer broker's compensation. In addition, Realtor B felt that it was his duty to his client to get the best price for the property by encouraging the buyer to reduce the cost of sale wherever practical. The hearing panel concluded that Realtor B's actions to encourage his buyer client to pressure the seller to try and modify the listing agreement with Realtor A was an unwarranted interference in their contractual relationship.
Agreed.
The hearing panel noted that Article 16, as interpreted by Standard Practice 16-16, required Realtor B to determine prior to presenting an offer to Realtor A and her seller client whether Realtor A was willing to contribute to Realtor B's commission, either directly or by reducing the commission as agreed to in the listing contract, and if so, the terms and amount of such contributions. It was the decision of the hearing panel that Realtor B had violated Article 16.
Yeah, it's pretty obvious that they had,
right? Well, and if you look at the Code of Ethics too, and I'll have to find it in here too, it references in one of 3 or 16 that none of these things precludes two realtors from renegotiating compensation. These things don't mean that two realtors can't pick up the phone before you show a property and say, hey, you're only offering X. I would like you to pay me Y. There's nothing that says you can't do that. You can absolutely do that.
Okay.
You just
can't be part of the contract.
and you have to do it at the appropriate
You either
time.
have to do it without telling the people that you're doing it and hiding it in some hiding it in some kind of closing costs, or you have to do it outside.
You have to do it before you walk into the property, before you show the property, and you have to make that arrangement so that it's not tied to the offer to purchase.
Yeah.
So that you don't have an undue influence on that offer. You negotiate that first, then you negotiate the offer second. So you can do it, you just have to do it the right way. But again, do not put the terms of commission into a purchase contract. It does not belong there.
Yeah, well, we'll have to talk about it when we get to the cabinet meeting.
And keep in mind that the cabinet meeting, that separate agreement that you have renegotiating that compensation isn't between you and the other broker. It's between you, the managing broker of one office and the managing broker of the other office.
Right.
They don't give if two agents agree to change compensation, it means absolutely nothing.
Well, and also whoever's paying it needs to agree.
Well, and that's why the managing broker of say in this case, the listing office. So the listing brokerage, if they agree to change it, then they have to, before they sign off on that agreement between the two brokerages, have to agree to that with their seller.
Right.
Or, you know what I mean? And get that in writing to say that we're going to adjust what's on our listing agreement based on.
Exactly. Because it changes their contract.
Right. Absolutely.
Right.
And it may not change the overall number. It changes how it's broken out, which is also part of the contract.
Man, here we go. We're going to vote to make contracts easier. Boom. Voted. Passed. Moving on.
We're just trying to keep you all legal.
Well, you do a good job. Luckily, yes. So Rachel, if people want to get a hold of you and they have a referral in Chicago, what is the best way to do that?
Best way to reach me is by cell phone at 630-542-8688.
Awesome. And if you want a copy of the article on Inman or a copy of this case, head to jennifermerlin.com/vault. Thanks for
People
being
have it all
on,
there.
Rachel.
You got it. It's always fun.
See ya.